What this quote by Ian Davis is hinting at is that starting and running a business is a lot harder than most people think. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, only 80% of startups survive after year one. Only 2 out of 3 businesses make it to the 2-year mark, and about half of all new businesses survive beyond 5 years. So why do so many businesses fail? And what are some of the key characteristics of businesses that can resist this trend and are able to look back on 100 years plus of business history? This will be the topic of today's video, as we focus on 5 key lessons that we can learn from companies that are included in the so-called Century Club, an elite club of businesses that have been around for at least a century. And in this context, we will also consider a theory that is called the Lindy effect, and that was popularized by famous author Nassim Taleb, the author of books such as Black Swan and Antifragile. So without further ado, let's get started. There's a very famous quote by Warren Buffett that to finish first, you must first finish. What Buffett was referring to back then was mainly investors' behavior, because reaching the finish line is simply easier in the world of investing when you avoid things such as leverage, when you don't make emotional decisions when the market experiences a sharp downturn, or when you think like a long-term investor and not like a speculator. But in a way, this principle can also be applied to businesses. In order to turn out to be a successful long-term investment, a business must first of all finish, meaning that the business has to make sure that it is still around 10, 20 or even 50 years from now. Because only then the stock and the underlying business can unfold the magic that compounding over the very long term can provide. Chris Meyer, he recently wrote in a blog post that in order to find stocks that return $100 for every $1 invested, you need to have a company to survive long enough to compound returns into multi-bagger status. Yeah, and the trend that I outlined in the introduction of this video, the trend that many young companies go out of business rather fast, can also be observed at more mature companies. And this is also reflected in broad stock market indices. Chris Meyer included the following chart in the aforementioned blog post, and it shows how the average lifespan of stocks included in the S&P 500 index saw a pretty consistent downward trend over the last couple of decades. And this is confirmed by a more recent study by McKinsey that highlighted that in 1958, the average lifespan of companies listed in the S&P 500 was 61 years. In 2016, however, it was less than 18 years. McKinsey believes that by 2027, 75% of the companies that are currently components of the S&P 500 will have disappeared. They will go bankrupt, or they may be bought by or merged with another company. Examples of big and dominant businesses that went bankrupt would include businesses such as Blockbuster, Enron, Chrysler, or Lehman Brothers. And businesses that still exist today but fail to innovate and are almost forgotten companies today would be firms like Toys R Us, Nokia, Macy's, or Yahoo. So apparently the large companies of today are not the same as the biggest businesses of yesterday. In the process of creative destruction that was famously outlined by Joseph Schumpeter, well, that process might very well be accelerating. But for some reason, a small number of companies is managing to escape this mass destruction. In the US, for example, there are just over 1,000 companies that have survived for more than 100 years, representing less of 0.5% of all companies operating in the United States today. And while it's obviously not easy to build a company that lasts for such a long time, some of the oldest businesses in America and also around the world are still thriving. And some of the more well-known businesses that are part of the Century Club include businesses like JP Morgan, Jim Beam, Colgate, or a Japanese company that I truly admire, Nintendo. So what are the special ingredients of these businesses that keep compounding decade after decade? Well, Vicky Tenhaken, she wrote a book that is titled Lessons from the Century Club Companies. And based on 10 years of hard research, surveys and interviews, she developed a framework that is consisting of 5 pillars, and all 5 pillars must be considered by businesses at the same time in order for a company to succeed over the very long term. So let's take a look at these 5 pillars. First, the businesses need to have a strong corporate mission and culture. For example, the author highlights that corporate mission statements are important as they emphasize what exactly makes the company unique, and these mission statements stress the long-term goal of the business. At the same time, mission statements make no mention of profits, financial strength, or other commonly used business metrics, and they solely focus on the long-term plan. Century Club companies, well, they do not just put these mission statements on their websites, no, they live and breathe their mission, and they share it with employees, customers, and suppliers. The second characteristic highlighted by Ten Haken is having unique core strength and change management, meaning that for these businesses, it's not in their DNA to simply rest on their laurels. To quote an executive from the 1886 founded business Hunter Fan Company. Sure, we invented the ceiling fan, but every day we find new ways to perfect it. That's our challenge and our passion. Thirdly, long-lasting businesses foster close relationships with their business partners. As the food business Mars Incorporated, that was founded in 1911, highlight, a mutual benefit is a shared benefit. We depend completely on the strength of our relationships with our consumers, with fellow associates, suppliers, distributors, and the communities in which we live and work. We believe that we will only achieve the best results if we are unselfish in these relationships and give a fair return. Fourthly, Century Club businesses are known to commit to long-term employee relationships. To quote from the book, old companies believe long-term employees bring a wealth of institutional memory to issues and opportunities that arise. Building relationships with employees so they stay with the firm for a very long time is consistently described as a key longevity success factor. And finally, these businesses are active members of the local community. Now, if you invert these 5 principles, you get a checklist that may help you spot companies that aren't as durable as our Century Club members. These businesses do not follow a clearly defined long-term mission. They make use of lots of leverage and care about short-term profit maximization. They have low employee retention rates, which can decrease motivation and morale, creating an overall poor corporate culture. And they have unhealthy, one-sided and short-term relationships with their suppliers and customers. Now, when talking about long-lasting businesses and how technological change can make former successful companies go extinct, we inevitably need to mention the Lindy effect, a concept that Nassim Taleb presented in his book Antifragile. Essentially, the Lindy effect states that the future life expectancy of certain non-perishable things like a book, a technology, or an idea is proportional to its current age. So the longer something has been around, the higher the odds or the chances that it will continue to be relevant for a very long time going forward. For example, a play that has run on Broadway for 5 years will likely stick around for 5 more years. Similarly, activities like drinking coffee or gambling have been around for centuries. And so it's quite likely that in 100 years from now, people will still be gambling and drinking coffee. So when you want to avoid companies and stocks that don't make it past a few years, you might want to carefully assess how long their products or services have already been around, which gives you, a certain degree of predictability, which in turn makes business valuation much easier. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon.com, well, he has articulated that very idea. The idea that focusing on things that don't change rapidly is extremely important in the world of business. To quote him here, what's going to change in the next 10 years? That's a very interesting question. It's a very common one. I almost never get the question, what's not going to change in the next 10 years? And I submit to you that the second question is actually the more important of the two, because you can build a business strategy around the things that are stable in time. In our retail business, we know that customers want low prices, and I know that's going to be true 10 years from now. They want fast delivery. They want vast selection. It's impossible to imagine a future 10 years from now where a customer comes up and says, Jeff, I love Amazon. I just wish the prices were a little higher. Or, I love Amazon. I just wish you'd deliver a little slower. Impossible. So we know the energy we put into these things today will still be paying dividends for our customers 10 years from now. When you have something that you know is true, even over the long term, you can afford to put a lot of energy into it. Okay, if you want to learn more about Amazon's long-term business strategy and what YouTube star Mr. Beast copied from Jeff Bezos himself, you should check out the following video next. Take care.